Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Photo Mentor TV question and answer live session. This is Friday evening, 9 p.m. as usual, every week. Thanks for joining us. Glad you're here. And if you've never been here before, or maybe you're watching on the replay, this is where we answer questions for new photographers that seem to have trouble getting straight answers. I know that I started this because I got frustrated myself seeing incorrect answers and myths repeated over and over again on forums and groups, and so I figured this would be a great place to give people some straight answers, let you ask your questions directly of me, and if I can answer them, I'll do my best. So anyway, Again, my name is Lee Love, and I appreciate you joining us this evening. We'll be here for about an hour. Got some good questions already queued up that we'll go over. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can join us on Facebook. If you're watching this probably live, you probably already know that. Facebook.photomentor.tv will redirect you directly to the Facebook page. Or if you prefer, you can watch it on and ask questions on YouTube. And again, youtube.photomentor.tv will take you directly to the YouTube page. But either one of them work, and we're happy that you are here with us tonight. Let's see. I told you why. I also caution everybody that the advice I give is based on my own experience. As with any advice you get from anyone, I would check it, double check it, myself included. Because, I'm trying to answer a question based on a simple answer, a simple question, and I may not have all the information. And so you just double check whatever anyone tells you with a grain of salt. Make sure you get the right answer. No want you to go out and spend money you don't need to be spending. Okay, let's get started. Again, I told you how you can ask questions. I like to start every show with a little bit of a quote or something that I think kind of inspire you, hopefully. And this is a quote from Ansel Adams. And the quote says, "There's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept." If you don't know who Ansel Adams is, he was probably one of the most well-known landscape photographers. He did a lot of work for the National Park Service. But anyway, and what he's trying to say here is that our pictures should tell stories. Even if it's a simple picture, even if it's just a picture of a friend or something like that. If your picture doesn't have something behind it, a meaning behind it of what you're trying to communicate, then that won't come across to the viewer either. So it's kind of difficult to explain, I'll be honest with you, but I always try and include something in the picture to help reinforce the story. So if I'm photographing, and maybe I'm doing a magazine article on somebody, I'm shooting for a magazine, and the person is an author, for example, then I want to try and find maybe books in the background or something that helps subtly reinforce that story. I also love working on conceptual photos. I should have some here, but I don't. Where I've come up with just ideas of different things that don't go together and kind of put them together. And so I guess what I'm trying to get across to you is try and have some meaning behind your photos, some story behind it. It can be subtle. It doesn't have to be in your face. They could be holding a book. They could be holding a kitten, whatever, something that says something about that person. And I find that a lot of people spend a lot of time on the technical aspects of photography, but very little time on understanding the composition and understanding the artistic or the critique side of it, the art part of it, I guess. Anyway, that's so try and work on that a little bit. If you have some examples you want to send me, you're welcome to do that. You can always send email to help@photomentor.tv. If you have a question you want to ask, then maybe we can put on this show next week or something, or I can try and answer it directly if I get that email. Or if you just have a photo you want me to look at and give you a review or whatever, you can always send email to that address, and I'll do my best to reply as soon as possible. So keep that in mind. Also, again, you can always use that to send questions also. Okay, so let's get started here. Tonight, I think our first question is, let's see if I got this right. Our first question is from Lewis Smiles. And Lewis says, "I was wondering what memory card I should get for a Nikon D3500. I mainly do wildlife photography." And I see this question a lot. And I'm going to give you some insight into kind of cards and what you should look for. But keep in mind that there are a bunch of different cards. And the problem is that can get very confusing as to, what kind of card you need to get. So here is, let's see if I can pull this one up. Yeah. All right. So there are kind of, most people are using SD cards nowadays. They could be using something else. But if you're using an SD card, definitely a D3500 would use an SD card, for example. And whoops, wrong one. Sorry. And so there are three kinds of cards. There's an SD card, an SDHC, and an SDXC. And the definition, an SD card, just a plain SD card, is typically an older format card, and one that would go on a point and shoot, that kind of thing. And the difference is the capacity. That's what the HC stands for, high capacity. And then the next one is extended capacity. So those are the three kind of cards you're going to find. Now, this question was specifically about the D3500, and it will take any of those cards. But some of the older cameras, so if you have an older Nikon or an older Canon, let's say a T2i or an XT1 or a Nikon D70, something like that, some of those cameras would not take large capacity cards. Now, some of them also don't use SD cards, but the point is, make sure. So I've had people that will purchased a brand new card. It's a 64 gig card or 128 gig card, and it doesn't work. And they're saying, I don't know what's going on. It has nothing to do with the card. The card is fine. They think their camera is broken. Excuse me. But the problem is not that. It's just that the camera cannot handle those kind of cards. So that could be an issue for you. So keep that in mind. There are also, it's important here, I'll show you here. There are different speeds of cards. So here's what's going to happen when you go and buy a card. You're going to see the prices are going to be all over the map, and you're going to kind of be trying to figure out what's going on here. Is this, are they ripping me off or whatever? No. The problem is that there are two issues that affect the cost of a card: the speed of the card and the capacity of the card. So you may look at a card and go, wow, this is a 64 gig card. It's really cheap, but it might be a very slow card, meaning that the camera can't write or read from it very fast. Now, keep in mind, you can get the fastest card there is, but if your camera won't write to that card in the appropriate speed, it really won't matter because you're not going to see the benefit of it. So you may go, oh, I'm shooting sports. I need this really 300 megabit per second card. Well, your camera may not benefit from that card. So don't overbuy a memory card either. So I would say, if you stick with something that's in the class 10, you can get a high-speed card. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. Something that'll do 10 megabits or 6 megabits per second. This is actually megabytes per second, I think, the way they've rated this one. But the thing is, you don't have to overspend, and you don't have to get super fast cards because many times the cameras won't benefit from it. Now, the problem is that the manufacturers that I've seen don't really rate how fast the system can read and write from most cameras. And that's a problem. If you're shooting video, you typically want a little faster card. But the idea is that you really won't be able to benefit from it. Now, let me give you an exception here. If your camera uses one of the newer cards, which is referred to as a UHS2 card. So here's the difference, and here's how you can tell. The front of the card will look the same, okay, like the one on the right looks the same. But if you notice, the one on the left has one set of pins across the top. The second card in the middle has two sets of pins. That's how you can tell if it's a UHS2 card. Also, if you look at the speed of this SanDisk, it's saying it can write at 280 megabits per second. That's a pretty fast card. And they're going to be much more expensive. But if you're shooting video or something where you need that high capacity, and your camera will support UHS2. Now, they're backwardly compatible, so if you have a UHS2 card, it will work in a camera that only accepts a UHS1 card, but you won't get the speed benefit. So you'd be spending money that the camera can't use. Now, that doesn't mean in the future your camera won't be able to use it, or a different camera might be able to use it, so it's a good investment. Also, I've noticed that a lot of the newer cameras have two slots. Slot 1 will only take the UHS1 or 2, but it doesn't use the UHS2. And the second slot will benefit from the UHS2. So that's an item there. So the point is, keep in mind that it's the speed and the capacity that's going to affect the price of the card. Now, some people will say, well, why do I want a card that's 280 megabits per second if my camera can't take advantage of it? Well, there's the other side of it, and that is downloading the images. So sometimes it can take a lot of time, and depending on your situation, put that in the reader. So the reader may be able to read that on your computer and benefit from that high-speed card. You just can't shoot to it. The card, the camera can't take advantage of the speed, but the reader can, and the computer can. So that's one reason why you might want to have a higher speed card. So anyway, there's give you for wildlife, unless you're doing birding and things like that. That's where maybe a higher speed card will have benefit. The other thing that you'll notice is that some cameras have a buffer, what's called a memory buffer. And what happens is the card writes, the camera writes to the internal memory, and then from there it will write out to the card. So even if you have a somewhat slower card, the camera can keep up because it writes to this internal memory first, and then it reads it out, or writes it out to the cards. So you can still use those kinds of cards. All right, let's see what else we got. So Brittany says, all right, I'm shooting my first engagement photos next weekend for a friend. She's been kind enough to let me practice shooting people with her and her fiance. Any advice? Well, Brittany, that's kind of a tough one. I would say, I assume what you're saying, the engagement photos are probably going to be outside. So the first thing I would do is try and look for an interesting background. You'll hear me preach two things: shoot, 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 shoot. In other words, always keep shooting. I'm not talking about spraying and praying here, just getting 1,000 pictures. I'm talking about you have to keep shooting every day, every other day to keep up, and because it's a lost art. But what I'm talking about here is, and the second thing you'll hear me tell people is background, background, background. Look for a location that has a subtle background that's not too busy, not too bright, and you want because you want the couple to be the brightest part of the scene, and so you want some kind of a dark background, relatively dark, or neutral background behind them. Also look for a place with shade. So if you put them in the shade, you can control the lighting better. So if it doesn't sound like you probably have gotten to the point where you're using off-camera flash or anything like that, I recommend you could get a piece of foam core or a reflector, a 5-in-1 reflector, which has multiple colored surfaces: white, black, silver, gold. And if you take that with the white and you bounce a little bit, use that to bounce a little bit of light if possible, if you have something to help you out, bounce a little bit of light on their face, that will make them pop a lot more as well. So look for a location that has an interesting background, not too busy, not too bright. Look for a place that has shade, and if you can, bounce a little bit of light into their face to try and make them pop out of that image. Definitely make a difference. So I hope that helped. Again, if you have any questions, if yourself, be sure and whoops, forgot to do this here. Be sure and put a Q in front of the question so it'll show up in my software that's on YouTube or Facebook. Okay. All right, so our next question is from Lindsay. She says, I can't figure out if it's a camera or the lens issue or me, which normally it's me. I can't seem to get the focus right no matter how hard I try. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but never comes out clear and crisp. There's a lot of things that could be. The first thing is find out what focus system you're using, because the cameras have multiple focuses. They'll have averaging, they'll have group focusing, they'll have automatic focusing where they'll have like 51 focus points, and it'll try and figure out the subject. The method that I prefer is a single point focus. I want that one dot. I can move around. It's either in the center or whatever. I'll put that on their eye. I'll focus there. I'll then recompose. And that way I know that I'm focusing on the face. So that's the first thing. Make sure that the camera's not focusing on the background or something else. The second thing is you need to know whether your camera has a problem or not. Now, in my experience, most of the time it's not the camera, it's the person, but you never know. So what I recommend is that you can do this very very easily. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can get a focusing system that will, you can download a chart off the internet. You don't have to spend a bunch of money or anything like that. This is a fancy one here. You don't need anything quite this fancy. You want to set your camera up on a tripod. You want to make sure that the target is flat. You could do this on a brick wall, for example. You don't have to, or a piece of paper. You can take a piece of newspaper, tape it on the wall, make sure it's evenly lit, and that the camera is parallel with the subject or with the target, tripod preferably, okay? And then shoot that target and look to see if it's sharp, and look at the corners, that type of thing. And then go through each aperture. Start at the widest aperture. Let's say it's 2.8, 3.5, 5.6, 6.3. Keep going through those aperture settings and look to see if the image is sharp throughout the entire range. That's the first thing you need to do. That will then ensure or help give you some confidence that it's not the equipment, that the equipment is fine. The second thing you can do is you can actually get a little fancier, and you can do what's called, you can get a chart, or I've been able to use a ruler for this. And what you're trying to do here is you want it at an angle, okay? You want to set it up at an angle, and you want the camera to be able, and again, focus on the center part, but put it up at an angle. Like I said, you could use a ruler or something like that. You don't have to go and buy a chart if you don't want. And then what this does is this then will let you determine if the camera is what they call back focusing or front focusing. So what you would do is you'd put that single dot I was talking about right there on the center, that black line, or let's say you put it on a ruler, you put it on the 6-inch mark, okay, and focus there. Take some pictures wide open. You can go through a couple apertures if you want, and then look at the photos. And what you'll find is if the camera is back focusing, sometimes you may be focusing on that part in the middle, but the camera actually is focusing behind that point. Sometimes it's front focusing. It will focus in front of that point. And so you want to be able to determine that. And there's some adjustments depending on the camera. Definitely the higher end cameras have this. You can, and it's very, very common, by the way. A lot of lenses don't match up exactly right with the camera, and so you have to go in and tweak it. And that's why a lot of cameras have the ability to make an adjustment in there. And so you can go in and you can adjust that, tweak that plus or minus to make sure that focusing point is exactly where it's supposed to be. That's the first thing. The other thing I recommend, if you really want to get kind of geeky about it, is to look at a company called Focal. It's Raycan Focal, and the product is called Focal. And what it is this is an amazing piece of software. What this will do is you hook it up to your laptop or your computer. You hook it up to your camera, and what happens is it goes through, and it will automatically go through and calibrate your lenses for you and your camera. And it will look to see if there's it will go through the entire range. It'll automatically adjust, at the smallest aperture and then the largest aperture, and it will give you a chart. They also give you can download a chart to be able to print out to tell you exactly how far it will be. This will give you, if you're really a geek about it and you want to know for sure, this will definitely give you accurate information about each lens. I know people that have purchased $18,000 lenses before, and they've used this on that, and they saw a remarkable difference. Now, you'd think that there wouldn't be a need for that if you had that expensive a lens, but sometimes there is. And so this would be something that you could look at. And again, I'll put it in the description of the both the show notes. But it's called Focal. If you do a search on it, Raycan Focal, and this would definitely be something if you want to go through and check and make sure all your lenses are correct. So anyway, so the point is that most of the time, here's what I find. I've had lenses I thought had a problem, and I swear they had a problem, and then I go do something like this, or I put them on a chart, and I find they are perfect. So most of the time, frankly, it's the Yahoo behind the camera that's the problem. I always assume that's the issue, and you may as well. But anyway, so that's something to think about, is if you want, either get a piece of paper, put it on the wall, test it, try it, test the focus points, go through it, and if you really want to know, then take a look at this Focal software, and that might be another way to go if you really, really want to confirm that that's what's going on there. Let me just check this here. Okay. I'll make sure I'm looking at this correctly. Okay. Next question is, okay, Penny says, I decided to buy a DSLR, but now I'm wondering whether a mirrorless one is better instead of taking close-up shots of wildlife. Penny, it really doesn't matter. I got to tell you. Look, everybody has their preference. Or some people say, oh, you got to go mirrorless. Mirrorless is the future. They're not going to make DSLRs anymore. That's bunk. That's not true. It just depends on what you like. I will also say that it has very little to do with the camera. If you hand an experienced photographer any camera, they can make a decent picture out of it. So what you may find with the mirrorless versus DSLR, sometimes the mirrorless have a higher frame rate per second. That might be an advantage if you're doing sports, wildlife, or birding. But other than that, it really doesn't matter. What does matter is the lenses. The lenses is really, the quality of glass is going to make a big difference. And I've told this story before. I'll tell you again, though. And that is, I bought a Nikon 70-200 2.8 back in 2004 when I was switching from film to digital. The lens was $1,800. I was like, oh man, this is a lot of money. I don't think I want to spend this. I should get something else. Well, my wife, being brilliant as she is, convinced me, nope, get the Nikon. You're not going to be happy if you don't get it. So anyway, I kept that lens up until about 9 months ago, and then I sold it and bought the upgraded model because I thought, okay, the upgraded model is going to be a little better. And maybe it is a little better, but I'll be honest with you, I can't see any difference with my eye. So I made a lot of money with that lens. The lens worked perfectly. It's a fantastic lens, but the quality of the glass really is the key. So, and if you're going to be doing wildlife and birding, you're going to want telephoto. I mean, there's no way to get around that. If you're a Nikon shooter, I recommend looking at something like the 200 to 500. That's a fantastic lens. It's really, really sharp. I'm amazed at how sharp that lens is. Or you could go with there's a Sigma and a Tamron. They both make a 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Really, really nice lenses, very good lenses. I've shot both of those as well, and those would be another option. But that having that depth or that telephoto capability is really what's going to make a big difference for you. So it doesn't matter if it's a DSLR or mirrorless. What matters is the image. People are going to look at the image and go, oh, it's amazing. They ask you what camera it is, and they're probably just a photo geek and not really somebody that's really cares about photography that much anyway, or they don't care about the art part of it. Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, the next one is Selena. She says, when shooting in manual, are you only supposed to be able to get one shot at a time before a buffer? Okay, Selena, here's the deal. Manual has nothing to do with how many frames per second the camera can shoot. That's typically done in a completely different mode. I believe on the Canon, I believe it's the AI function, the AI servo motion will determine, our function will determine how many frames per second. On the Nikon, it is the well, I should know this. It's just I don't know. I forget what it's called. Anyway, so there's an adjustment in the menu system for whether how many frames per second that you want, and that has nothing to do with whether you're shooting in manual or not. In fact, what will affect some cameras, not all, some cameras, the higher speed cameras, will not autofocus in high speed modes. Because they will focus once, but then when you push the button and hold it down, it won't continue to reacquire focus because it's just too much going on there too fast to be able to do that. And so that may be one thing you want to look at. But generally, manual and the number of frames per second or the buffer have nothing to do with each other. They're two separate issues. It might be if you're shooting raw files, those are larger, and the card may need to be faster, as we talked about earlier. And therefore, to be able to offload some of the information to the card faster, that could be one of the issues. Versus if your JPEG would be a smaller file and it would write quicker. And then again, it could just be the camera itself, and as far as its speed, or it could be the buffer, how big the buffer is. Anyway, I hope that helped. Okay. Next question is from Rosie, and it says, can someone please suggest a good, affordable photo printers that produce good quality photos at home? So, Rosie, my first question would be, are these photos for yourself, or are these ones you're going to sell to a client? And the reason is, this is a personal thing. Printing is the bane of my existence. It just is never, it's very, very difficult. If you're doing quality, high-end, fine art prints, then yes, you should invest in printing, quality papers, a high-end printer. But if you're not, if you these are like 8x10s that you're doing for a client or even for yourself, or maybe if you're going to just do a couple of them now and again, you want to print, then there's nothing wrong with getting a photo printer. But if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff, you're going to be doing it for a client, selling, I would consider going to a lab. The labs, they'll take all the guesswork out of it. You can send them a sample images, and they'll send you test prints to make sure they're calibrated right. If they mess up, they're going to reprint it. They'll take care of that. So if you're going to be doing a lot of printing, I strongly suggest you look at a photo lab. There's some photo labs that actually will do fine art print on some of the high-end Epson, Hahnemühle, and Moab papers. So you can get some really nice prints. If you're selling this, that cost then gets transferred over to the client. You're just going to be, it's not going to save a lot of money doing it yourself. Also, the inks on these things are unbelievably expensive. Now, let's talk about printers. If you're just going to be doing some casual stuff, basically there are two printers that are kind of the go-to printers in this category. The first one would be the Epson. The second would be the Canon. Both of those they both have models that'll do probably 13x19, which is about the biggest most people want to be able to print unless they're doing large fine art printing, as I said before. And then they get pretty expensive, and then that's a whole nother deal. But the 13x19 is typically the largest you'd want to print for yourself in a home printer. And I would say my experience has been the Epsons are probably one of the more popular because the inks are they're considered more permanent, although I think they're good for 150 years or some crazy thing like that. But in the Canons, in my experience, I prefer the Canons myself because I think the colors are more vibrant. I love the punchier color, and it uses a different kind of ink, which are not what you'd call archival, but they'll still last 100 years, I believe. I mean, there's not going to be a difference between the two. And if you put anything out in the sun, then of course it's going to affect it either way. But I prefer the Canons because I found my experience with the Epsons, if you don't print every day or at least once a week, the heads will get clogged, and it's very difficult sometimes to get them unclogged. You have to run the cleaning process, which sucks up a lot of ink, which is expensive. And if you have to replace the head, in other words, if you don't use it for a couple of months and you have to replace the head, that can cost more sometimes than the printer. So I found that I like the Canons, at least the ones I were using. I could pop the head out, clean it, put it back in, and not be an issue. That's my own personal experience. But like I said up front, printing is the bane of my existence. I don't understand. It seems like the technology has been light years ahead of where we were in camera technology and lenses and all of this computer technology. But it seems like printing hasn't moved forward at all. I mean, or very, very little. I mean, there's more inks. A lot of times these printers can take 6, 8, 10, 12 inks to get more gradation and finer quality printing. But other than that, it's still a difficult situation. And especially when it comes to calibrating your monitor, your printer, let me tell you, that is a nightmare. That will drive you crazy. And part of the reason is because the monitor is a luminance, a system that has, it's light emitting, where a print is light reflecting. So it's never quite the same getting them calibrated. So anyway, that's just my rant on that. Sorry, I don't mean to go too much difficult on that. Okay, see what else we got here. All right, so Patrick says, I have a 70D for landscapes and wildlife. A lot of wildlife and landscape photographers. And I think the reason is because they're everywhere. Landscape is everywhere. It's easy, and it doesn't move. So it's a lot easier to photograph. I've been thinking about upgrading. The dilemma is stick with the Canon, which I spent the last few years investing in good quality glass, or sell everything and start over. I see a lot of people going through this. They're kind of going to the latest and greatest. They'll see YouTube or reviews on some new camera. It's got all this great focusing system, mirrorless, this, that, and the other. And they think that that's going to improve their photos. And so they're thinking about selling that and moving up. My first question would be, what is it you can't do now with your current system that you think you could do with a newer camera? And I will venture to say that most of the time, nothing. If it has to do with your technique will always be better than and have more impact on your photos than the technology will. And I would say that a newer camera might inspire you. It might be something that you want to get. That's fine. You deserve it. But I can almost guarantee it's not going to improve your photos at all, especially because Patrick's already said he's invested in good glass. That is the key to any camera system. It's all about the glass. You can take a mediocre camera. I was talking to somebody just the other day. I have a Nikon 5100, I think it is, which is, the middle. It's a few, 3 or 4 generations old. And she purchased a Sigma 105 macro lens, and her images are just out. They were great before with the kit lens, but now they're even better. And she hasn't touched her camera, still a 16 megapixel camera, in fact. So if you've got really a good investment in glass, I would say stick with it until there's a real need for you to upgrade. That would just be my opinion. Anyway, it's all about the work, right? Let's look at the photos. If the photos are outstanding and people think that, your work is great, then why change? All right. Okay. The next question is from Kathleen. She says, I'm looking to buy new lenses. Opinions, please, on Sigma 7200 2.8. I don't know much about this brand. Okay. I think if I remember correct, Kathleen had a Nikon, but I'm not positive. Either way, first of all, a 70 to 200 2.8 is, in my opinion, a must-have lens. It's just a fantastic lens. You can use it for so many things. As I was giving an example earlier about the one I bought in 2004, you can use it for portraits. You can use it for sports. And the 2.8 meaning, so without getting too much detail here, a 2.8 means regardless if you're at 70 millimeter or 200 millimeter, the lens will stay at 2.8 if that's what you set it to. Where most lenses that are less expensive, the aperture will change. So let's say you have a 70 to 300 and it's rated at 3.5 to 5.6. What happens is when you're on the wide end at the 70 millimeter, the largest aperture you can have will be 3.5. But if you don't touch anything on your camera and all you do is zoom to 300, that aperture is going to close down to 5.6 or 6.3 automatically, whether you want it to or not. So you're going to get less light, at least a stop less light when you zoom in. And they do that to keep the cost down. So the lenses that have a fixed aperture, we call fixed aperture 2.8, doesn't mean it only shoots at 2.8. It means that as you're at 50, 70 or 200, you can still shoot at 2.8. Are always going to be more expensive. They're also great investments. So whether you get the Nikon, the Canon, the Sigma, or the Tamron, I highly recommend that as a lens you want in your arsenal. So regarding the Sigma, there are 2 versions of the Sigma. Keep in mind that they've had a version out for a long time. They just came out about maybe 6 months ago, I think, with a new version. I think they call it the Sport model. And it's a little bit upgraded. It has some better quality glass. It's about the same price, if I'm not mistaken. And it comes in at around $1,300, maybe a little bit less. They have some sales on them from time to time. And so the Tamron or the Sigma, 70 to 200, 2.8 are both very, very good lenses, and I would have no questions about recommending either of those. Go in, take a look at them. If you can, if you have a local camera store, bring your camera and a memory card, put it on your camera, go outside, shoot some images, take a look at them. I think you're going to find the difference between them is going to be very minute. I would say that the differences in all of these, typically, let's say for the Canon versus the Nikon, the manufacturer brands versus a Sigma or Tamron, the only difference is the quality is pretty good, But I know sometimes, not always, but sometimes the focusing can be a tad slower on the third-party lenses than the manufacturer's lenses. Also, I forget, I think this was a Nikon shooter, but if she was a Canon user, I don't understand. Keep in mind that the Canon lens only has a 1-year warranty. If it's a Nikon lens, then it would be different. That's a 5-year warranty. The Sigma has a 4-year warranty, and the Tamron has a 6-year warranty, I believe. Anyway, so that's something. So yes, 7200 2.8, great lens, Sigma. I would try and get the newer version if you can. The older version was in a black box. The newer one, I believe, was in a white box, and I think it's called the Sport model. Okay. Let's see what else. Maddie says, how do you become more intentional every time you make your shutter open? I've always ended up with thousands of images. I want to stop. Maddie, good question. Really good question. And I think it's interesting for me. Now I shoot my expertise and my specialty is advertising and magazine work and some corporate work. And for me, I'll just give you my experience. I have actually, I shoot less than I used to shoot before. And the reason is once I get the picture and I look at the screen, I know I have that shot. Maybe I'll try some experiment, what I call the money shot. Let's say a client's hired me to do something. I'll shoot some things. I know what they're looking for specifically. Once I know I have that, then I'll move on. Or maybe I'll try a couple experiments. So while we're set up, let's try this. Let's try that. Sometimes that works. Sometimes I get something better than what I originally shot. Sometimes it doesn't work. But you have to try that. So the thing is, I think the beauty of digital, and I think this is a myth, because, oh, digital's free. It doesn't cost anything. You can just shoot 1,000 pictures and eventually you'll get a good one. No, absolutely not. That is not the way to look at digital photography. What you're trying to do is the beauty of digital photography is I can make corrections quickly. If you're shooting 1,000 pictures, that tells me two things. Number one, you really need to work on your technique. And number two, you're not confident in your own work because you're just trying to shoot 1,000 pictures, hoping and praying that one of them will be good. And that is not the way to do it. So you should come out with, what I try and do is when I go to approach a photo shoot, I always try and come up with 3 ideas in my head. I've scoped out the location, hopefully, or at least I have a concept. And I try and think of 3 ways I might want to communicate this story, or I might want to take this photo. When I get there, I look on the location. Maybe I'll stick to those 3. Maybe I'll throw them out. Maybe there's something better. But I always go in intentionally with some idea of what I'm trying to do. And then that way, I'm not just, again, shooting 1,000 pictures, hoping something will come out. So, okay. My buddy James here says, never, where is he here? I don't know where your quote is there, James. Anyway, James says, never pray and spray. I agree. Never pray and spray. So, because it just doesn't do you any good to do that. Okay. You want to be able to, I guess that's not it. Sorry. So the thing is, if you're doing that, there's more going on there. That's not the symptom. That's a symptom of something else that's going on. So you want to be able to try and be more discerning and look and only shoot what you need. Because see, here's what happens. If you do this, then you're going to now spend 2 hours or more a week editing pictures. And that costs you money. It costs you time. And, frankly, it can be depressing to look at all these lousy pictures. Like, what was I thinking? So be more diligent, be more. And here's another tip I'll tell you. Somewhat related. Before you push that shutter button, do this. Look at all 4 corners of the frame. Don't worry about what's in the middle. What's in the middle, if the person you're shooting a photograph of a person or something, they're going to take care of themselves. But right before you push that button, take a look in the left, right, bottom, left, and look in those corners and see and ask yourself, is there something there I don't want in the picture, or is there something there I want in the picture? Because I've seen a lot of times when people say, oh, there's a big tree in the background. I didn't even notice it. If they would have moved over 6 inches or a foot, they could have completely removed that background just by taking a few seconds before you push that shutter and making sure that picture is very deliberate. So just try and get better at that. Again, look at the back of it. They call it chimping, by the way. Look at the back of the screen. Look and see what you've done. Examine it. Is it right? Is it wrong? Okay, I see what I did wrong. Let me correct. And then move over or whatever, recompose, and get another shot. All right, so let's see. So, Maddie, I hope that helps you. I don't know if it will or not. Oh, I don't know who this is. Okay. So this question is from Dana. Says, when I post my photos to Instagram or Facebook, they seem to change a bunch and aren't crisp and clear. Any ideas? Well, again, there could be a lot of things there, but here's my basic suggestion. Look at the specs for each of the platforms you're going to be uploading to. Then resize the images to those specs before you upload them. In other words, if you take a full-size image and you upload it to one of the social media sites, they're going to resize it. They're going to change it themselves. They're going to use their algorithms to do that. And the chances are they're going to want to make it as small as possible. Okay? Whereas if you resize it yourself before you upload it, then they're not going to have to do that. And therefore, they're not going to munge up the system as much as possible and try and get the file size down because it's already at that size. The other thing that I would suggest is try, and depending on what software you're using, resize the image first. Let's say it's a 3,000 by 4,000 picture. You're going to resize it to 1,500 pixels or whatever the social media site. Then add your sharpening as a last resort before you upload it. Because what happens is I've noticed that if I do my sharpening at the full resolution, it may take a lot more sharpening than what it really needs. And then when I reduce the file size down, I don't even notice if it's sharpened or not. It just, because it's not the same image size. But if I resize my final image before I'm going to print or before I'm going to output it, and then do my sharpening, you'll find you don't have to sharpen it as much and you have a lot more control over it. So that's just something to consider there. Let me look at something here real quick, see if I can get, I don't know why your photos aren't on here, James. I'm trying to, or why your quote aren't here. Let's see if I can get James's quotes on here. Oh, I know what I'm looking at. So, yeah. Don't know. Should be working there, James. Whoops, no. Oh, okay. Let's see what else we got here. All right. So the next question is from. Oh, that was the last question. Okay, cool. Dana again. So this is a great James. I wish I could bring James's quote on here. I can't do this for some reason because I don't know what I'm doing. I guess. Not unusual, by the way. If you saw this, if you had to figure out all this stuff at the same time with only one person, you'd understand why sometimes it doesn't work as well as you'd think it would. But the thing is, what James made a point. He says, imagine you went out with a roll of film, and that's something I agree with. So imagine you went out with only 36 pictures, and you were only going to take those 36 pictures. You would be much more deliberate with every frame because now you only, so in other words, this is a little exercise that I've done myself. How important is that picture? Is it really something I want to invest in? Because that's really what you're doing. You're investing your time, your emotion, your time, and your energy to be able to take that photo. So when you look at it, say, is that really a good picture? Is that really the picture I want to take? And is it worth one of the 36 frames that I have on my camera? And if you do that, you will find you're much more deliberate. In fact, that's one of the things I like about film photography. I don't like the process anymore, believe me, but the fact that I had to be more deliberate about what I was going to photograph. So if I was going to take a picture, and especially when I was shooting 4x5 where you have a sheet film, okay, that's a big deal. You have to set up a camera, you have a hood, you have to go over and focus and look at a ground glass. you got to make sure that is really a photo you want to take. And I think in our days of iPhone photos where you're just snapping pictures like crazy, that we forget that we're trying to tell a story again. As I said earlier, we want to make sure, is this really something that it's worth my time? Am I invested in this photo? Am I going to print this photo? Is this something I'm going to hang on my wall? If it's not, and it's just a throwaway photo, then maybe you want to move on and try and find something that's meaningful to you, that really you're seeing something unique in that photo you've never seen before, or maybe at an angle or a way you want to do it you've never seen before. And that would be then a time you want to stop, be more deliberate, and take that photo. So anyway, it's a difficult thing, I know. But it's something that's important that we all have to kind of learn about and to spend time with, and to make sure that we're really that we're making the best photos that we can make. And again, I'll kind of go back to the Ansel Adams quote we started with. There's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. And I think that's the same kind of that goes back to the the shooting a bunch of images and not knowing whether or not they're going to be valuable or not. Is this really a story? Is there really something here that I want to tell? And does it make sense for me to do this and spend my time and investment in this? To actually, because before you had a dark room, you not only did you had to take the picture, but you also had to, print it, develop it. And so I think as the time went on, we became more, deliberate about our photos. So anyway, I think that's it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us. James, thanks for jumping in there with your questions and your comments. Always good to see everybody on. I hope this has been helpful to you. Again, we do this every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. And if you're in another part of the world, then it'd be 0100 hours UTC, Universal Coordinated Time. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this, and look forward to seeing you next week.